It was early October when I decided to take a solo trip deep into the woods near the northern part of the state. I'd been going through a rough few months, and I needed to clear my head. I'd planned to camp for 3 nights, away from people, traffic, and noise. I wanted to disappear into the quiet, just me and the trees. I drove for hours until I reached a narrow gravel road that twisted through dense pine and oak forest. The air smelled damp and heavy with the scent of wet leaves and earth. I parked near a small clearing that wasn't an official campsite, just an open patch of grass surrounded by thick woods on all sides. The first thing I noticed was how silent it was. No wind, no sound of birds, just the occasional creak of trees shifting. I set up my tent, unpacked my cooler, and gathered some dry branches to make a fire before dark. Felt peaceful at first, the kind of silence that wraps around you and makes you forget about everything else. When the fire finally caught, the orange light flickered against the trunks of the trees, and I could see my breath rising into the cold air. That night, I sat close to the fire for warmth, eating a simple meal from a can and watching the shadows dance. Around 10 p.m., I crawled into my tent, zipped it up, and laid down on my sleeping bag. The quiet was heavy. I remember thinking it was strange how there wasn't even the sound of insects, just stillness. I must have fallen asleep for an hour or 2 before I woke up suddenly, unsure why. My heart was racing. There was a sound, something faint but distinct. A crunch, like someone stepping on dry leaves, slow and careful. I stayed completely still, staring up at the dark outline of the tent above me. I tried to convince myself it was a deer, maybe even a raccoon digging around the camp. But the steps were too steady, too deliberate. They circled around the tent, slow, soft, one at a time. I could hear the faint brush of movement, like fabric or clothing brushing against low branches. I held my breath and didn't move an inch. Eventually, the sound faded away, and I lay there, eyes open, waiting for hours until dawn. When the first bit of light hit the tent, I finally unzipped it and looked around. Everything seemed normal. The fire pit was just cold ash. My gear was untouched. I found a few footprints in the dirt, though they weren't clear enough to tell much, but they were definitely shoe prints, not animal tracks. That thought stayed in my head all morning. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself maybe a hiker had passed through during the night. I didn't like it, but I wasn't going to pack up yet. I went for a walk that afternoon just to explore. The forest was dense but beautiful. The trees were tall and old, their branches tangled like dark webs above me. I followed what looked like an old logging path, barely visible under the fallen leaves. After maybe 30 minutes, I found something strange. A pile of items laid out neatly on a flat rock. There were a few broken tools, a rusted tin cup, and what looked like pieces of fabric or clothing, faded and torn. It looked like someone had been living there, or maybe leaving things behind on purpose. The weirdest part was how the items were arranged, perfectly lined up like a display. I didn't touch anything. I just stood there staring, feeling that heavy quiet again pressing on my ears. When I got back to my camp, I couldn't shake the unease. The woods felt different now, less peaceful, more watchful. I didn't see anyone the rest of the day, but every now and then I'd catch what sounded like a faint movement far off in the trees. A twig breaking, a shuffle in the leaves. Each time I looked, there was nothing there. By the time night came again, the air had gotten colder. I made a fire, but I noticed my firewood pile was smaller than I remembered. I could have been mistaken, but I was sure I'd gathered more earlier. I sat closer to the fire this time, my flashlight beside me. The sky was completely dark. No moon, just stars through thin gaps in the branches. Around midnight, I started hearing it again. Footsteps, distant at first, then closer. Slow, steady, pausing between each one. The sound stopped right at the edge of the clearing. I aimed my flashlight toward the noise. The beam caught the thick tree trunks and low brush, but nothing else. Then I saw it. Something small glinting in the beam of light. A reflection. Eyes? No. It looked metallic, like a piece of glass or metal catching the light, just for a second. Then it vanished. I felt frozen. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. I sat awake until sunrise again, gripping the flashlight like it would save me from whatever was out there. When morning came, I walked to where I thought I'd seen that reflection. I expected to find nothing, but there was something. A small, broken trail camera nailed to a tree, the lens cracked, and the back ripped open like someone had smashed it with a rock. I hadn't noticed it before, and it didn't look old. The battery compartment was still clean. It didn't make sense. There was no reason for anyone to leave a broken camera out here unless they were trying to spy on something or someone. That was the moment I decided I'd leave that night instead of the next morning. I didn't care about losing the camping trip. Something was off about this place. I packed my cooler early and kept my things ready so I could leave fast. I tried to relax for the rest of the day, but the feeling of being watched never went away. Every time I walked a few steps away from the tent, I'd look back and scan the trees. The forest was so thick that anything or anyone could have been standing 10 feet away and I wouldn't have seen them. As the sun set, the shadows stretched long across the clearing. I didn't even bother lighting a fire this time. I wanted to stay quiet. I sat in my tent with the zipper open halfway, watching the trees while holding my flashlight. My car was maybe 50 yards away down the dirt trail. I told myself I'd wait until the moon rose, then pack the tent fast and drive off. But around 9 p.m., I started hearing something again. This time, it wasn't footsteps. It was a low, dragging sound, like something being pulled through leaves. Slow, steady, rhythmic. I killed the flashlight and crouched inside the tent. The sound came from the direction of the trail leading to my car. It stopped for a few seconds, then started again, closer. I could feel the adrenaline kick in, my pulse thudding in my throat. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The dragging sound stopped completely, and for a few seconds, there was just silence. Then came a single sound, something metallic tapping lightly, like a small piece of metal knocking against wood. I finally snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent, and ran straight toward the car. My flashlight beam swung wildly across the trees, catching glimpses of branches, leaves, shadows. But then it caught something that made me freeze for half a second. There was a tarp, half buried in leaves near the trail, dark and torn, with something large underneath it. I didn't stop to look. I ran harder than I ever had in my life, threw myself into the driver's seat, and hit the ignition. As my headlights cut through the trees, I saw something that made my stomach twist. There was another tent, smaller, camouflaged, half hidden behind brush maybe 20 feet from where I'd been camping. The flap was open, and I could see an old sleeping bag inside. I didn't stop to check it. I just hit the gas and drove down that gravel road until I hit the main highway. When I got home the next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about that tarp, that tent, the broken camera, and the sounds I'd heard. Later that week, I called the local ranger's office and told them what I'd found, where I'd been camping, the coordinates from my GPS, and that there might be something under a tarp out there. The ranger said they'd send someone to check it out. A few days later, I got a call back. They said they found signs someone had been camping illegally in that area, and a few personal items, but nothing else. No tarp, no camera, no tent. Everything was gone. It's been months now, but I still think about it almost every night. I try to tell myself it was just some drifter, maybe a hunter, maybe someone who didn't want to be found. But sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night and see my bedroom window reflected in the dark, and I swear I can almost feel that same silence from the woods pressing in again. Like something out there learned how to stay just far enough away, waiting for me to go back. It was late August when I decided to spend a weekend alone in the woods. I'd been wanting to test out some new camping gear before an upcoming trip with friends, and I figured a solo weekend would help me get used to being completely on my own again. I chose a spot deep in the northern woods, miles away from the nearest campground, near a small lake that didn't even have a name on the map. It was one of those places you only find if you know what you're looking for. The plan was simple. Hike in on Friday, stay 2 nights, hike back out on Sunday. I left early in the morning, driving through long stretches of empty road. The deeper I went, the more the landscape changed, less farmland, more forest. The road narrowed until it turned into gravel, then dirt. Eventually, I parked my truck near a faded trail marker, slung my pack over my shoulders, and started walking. The air was thick with humidity, and the woods smelled damp, heavy with pine and wet earth. The trail was barely visible. It wound through dense trees, with thick undergrowth clawing at my legs. I could hear the occasional rustle of animals moving through the brush, but nothing unusual. It took me about 3 hours to reach the lake, a still, dark pool surrounded by trees that leaned toward the water like they were studying their own reflections. I picked a small clearing on the north side, where the ground was flat enough for my tent and close enough to the water that I could refill my bottles. I set up camp, built a small fire pit, and gathered enough wood for the night. The day passed quietly. There was something strangely peaceful about the stillness out there. No sound of engines, no voices, no signs of people at all. When the sun started to dip behind the trees, I sat by the fire, eating from a small pot of beans and rice. The orange glow flickered across the trees, and the smoke drifted lazily upward, disappearing into the dark. That first night, I laid in my tent listening to the sounds of the forest. It wasn't silent, not at first. I could hear the small clicks and scratches of insects, the occasional hoot of an owl far away. But as the night went on, the sounds faded until everything went dead quiet. I woke up around 2 a.m. without knowing why. My heart was already beating fast, like my body knew something my mind didn't yet. I listened. Nothing, not even wind. Then, faintly, I heard a single sound, the snap of a stick somewhere near the lake. It wasn't loud, but in that silence, it might as well have been thunder. I lay there staring up at the roof of the tent, not daring to move. I told myself it was probably a deer, maybe a raccoon. But then I heard another sound, a slow, steady crunch of leaves, followed by another stick breaking. Someone, or something, was walking near my camp, slow, careful. I could hear the pattern of footsteps, one after another, moving around the clearing. I held my breath, barely blinking. After a few minutes, the sound stopped. Nothing moved. The woods went silent again. I must have stayed awake for another hour, frozen in my sleeping bag, until exhaustion finally pulled me back under. When I woke up in the morning, sunlight was streaming through the trees. Everything looked normal. But when I stepped out of the tent, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. About 30 feet from where I'd set up, there were fresh boot prints in the mud. Not mine. They were larger, heavier, and led straight toward the edge of the clearing, right up to where my tent was, then turned away toward the trees. Whoever it was had been standing close enough to touch my tent. I spent the next hour trying to calm myself down. I told myself it could have been a hunter, someone passing through early in the morning. Maybe they saw the light of my fire and came to check who was there. That made sense, sort of. Still, the thought of someone walking up to my tent in the middle of the night didn't sit right. I decided I'd stay just one more night, but I'd be ready to leave fast if anything else felt wrong. That afternoon, I went exploring along the lake's edge. The water was dark and still, so still that the trees on the far side reflected perfectly. I followed the shoreline for about half a mile before I noticed something unusual. There was an old, makeshift camp about 50 yards from the water. A small fire pit, some torn plastic sheeting hanging from a branch, and a few empty cans scattered on the ground. The site looked abandoned but not old, maybe a few weeks, a month at most. The ashes in the pit were gray but still clumped, not completely washed away by rain. I poked around a bit and found an empty backpack under one of the logs, torn open at the zipper. Inside was a dirty sleeping bag and a small knife. I don't know why, but being there made my skin crawl. There was something about the way everything was left, like the person who used it had left in a hurry. I didn't stay long. I went back to my camp before sunset, made sure everything was packed neatly, and built another fire. As the night came down, the same heavy silence returned. I tried to distract myself by writing a few notes in my journal, but I kept glancing up at the tree line. The light from the fire didn't reach far. Beyond that small circle, the woods were pitch black. Around 10 p.m., I put out the fire and got into the tent. I wasn't tired, but I wanted to stay quiet and hidden. Sometime past midnight, I woke up again to that same feeling. Heart pounding, mind completely alert. This time I heard the sound right away. Slow footsteps in the dirt. They were closer than before, circling the camp, pausing every few steps. My breathing sounded too loud in my ears. The footsteps stopped just outside the tent. I could see a faint shadow through the thin fabric, something tall, motionless, blocking out part of the moonlight. My hand was on the handle of the knife I kept beside me, but I didn't move. I just lay there, barely breathing. After what felt like forever, the shadow shifted, then disappeared. I listened as the sound of steps moved away, growing quieter until I couldn't hear anything at all. I stayed awake the rest of the night, gripping the knife, waiting for the first bit of light to hit the tent. As soon as the sun came up, I packed everything in record time. I didn't even bother making breakfast. I wanted to get back to the truck as fast as possible. When I started hiking back, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The woods felt different, like I wasn't leaving alone. Every sound made me jump. Every snapped twig felt directed at me. About halfway back, I found something that stopped me cold. A fresh boot print in the mud, heading the same direction I was going. It was identical to the ones I'd seen near my tent. I don't think I've ever walked faster in my life. I didn't stop until I saw the glint of my truck through the trees. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before I finally got the door open. I threw my gear in the back, slammed the door, and sped off down that dirt road until I hit pavement. I didn't look back once. When I got home that night, I sat in my driveway for a long time, just staring at the trees lining my yard. I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was all coincidence. Maybe the tracks were old, and the person I thought I saw was just a trick of the light. But then I started unpacking, and I noticed something that made every hair on my neck stand up. Tucked into the side pocket of my pack was a single folded piece of paper. I didn't remember putting it there. It was old and damp, like it had been exposed to the weather for a while. I opened it up, and in faded pencil, someone had drawn a rough map of the lake, the same one I'd camped at, with a small X marked right where I'd pitched my tent. That was the last time I ever camped alone. I don't know who was out there or how they knew where I'd been, but I still think about those footprints sometimes. Someone had been watching me, not by accident, not by chance. They knew I was there. They waited until the fire went out, and they came close enough to listen to me breathe. I remember that trip so clearly because it was supposed to be my way to reset after a rough year. I'd been working non-stop, barely sleeping, and I felt like I was losing my mind from stress. So one weekend in late September, I packed my truck with gear and drove out to a place called Iron Hollow, a stretch of thick woods miles away from any main road. It wasn't an official campground, just a place I'd seen marked on an old map, with trails leading through the forest and a small lake in the middle. I wanted quiet, just me, the trees, and time to breathe. The drive took most of the day. The farther I went, the thinner the roads became. Eventually, the asphalt turned to gravel, then to dirt, and the trees on either side grew so close that their branches touched above the road. When I finally found a small clearing to set up camp, the light was already dim. I parked my truck off to the side and started unloading my things. The air was cool and damp, and everything smelled like wet pine and soil. I pitched my tent near the edge of the clearing, close enough to the truck that I could grab something quickly if I needed to, but far enough to feel like I was really out there. The woods around me were dense, so thick that once the sun dropped, you couldn't see more than a few feet into them. It was dead quiet, too. No people, no passing cars, not even the sound of distant water or birds. Just the occasional creak of a tree swaying somewhere in the dark. That kind of silence feels good at first, but it starts to weigh on you after a while, like the forest is holding its breath. That first night, I made a small fire and ate a simple meal. The air temperature dropped fast after dark, and the fire was the only warm light in miles. I remember sitting there, staring into the flames, feeling that weird mix of calm and unease. I couldn't explain it, but something about those woods felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just off. I brushed it off as being alone in a new place. I turned in early that night, zipped up inside my tent, wrapped in my sleeping bag. The ground was cold and uneven beneath me, but I was exhausted. I must have fallen asleep fast because the next thing I remember was waking up to a faint sound outside the tent. It was slow and irregular, like something moving through the leaves. I lay there still, telling myself it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But the sound was too steady for that. It moved slowly, then stopped, then started again. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I didn't move. After a while, it stopped completely. I waited, staring into the dark, until I finally drifted off again. When I woke up the next morning, everything looked normal. The ground was damp with dew, and the fire pit was nothing but cold ash. I walked around the clearing, half expecting to find tracks or something that explained the noise. I did find something, though, just a few yards from the tent, a small pile of stones stacked in a neat little column. It wasn't tall, maybe knee-high, but it wasn't there when I arrived. I hadn't made it. The stones were smooth, taken from the nearby creek bed, and balanced carefully on top of one another. It didn't make any sense. There were no other campsites for miles, and I hadn't seen a single car or hiker on the way in. I figured it was probably just some leftover thing from another camper, something I hadn't noticed when I set up. I kicked the stones over, packed a bag, and went for a hike to clear my head. The trail I followed wasn't really a trail, just a faint line through the trees where the grass was thinner. The forest felt endless. Every direction looked the same. Dark trunks, thick brush, and patches of sunlight breaking through the canopy. I walked for hours, stopping now and then to take a drink or just listen. But that silence never went away. No birds, no wind, not even the buzz of insects, just stillness. The only sound I ever heard was the crunch of my own boots on the ground. At one point, I came across an old, rotted hunting blind high up in a tree. The wood was splintered and gray with age. Below it, there was a small clearing with what looked like a fire pit long since abandoned. The ashes were scattered, and the dirt around it looked disturbed, like someone had been digging there not too long ago. I crouched down and ran my hand through the soil. It was loose. There were pieces of burnt metal and something else. Fabric, maybe, but it was too charred to tell. The longer I looked at it, the worse I felt. I backed away, suddenly aware of how deep I was in the forest, how alone I was, and how easy it would be to get lost out there. By the time I made it back to my campsite, the light was starting to fade again. My tent was exactly where I'd left it, but something about the clearing looked different. My cooler, which I'd left beside the fire pit, was tipped on its side, the lid open. A few of my things, utensils, a water bottle, a flashlight, were scattered in the grass. Nothing was missing, just rearranged, like someone had gone through them. That night, I couldn't relax. I didn't make a fire. I just sat in my truck with the doors locked, the windows cracked enough to breathe. I told myself I'd leave in the morning, but when I finally started to drift off, something hit the side of the truck. A sharp, quick sound, like a stick or a small rock. I froze. Then another one. Then silence. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, staring into the black wall of trees ahead of me. After a long stretch of quiet, I turned the key just enough to power on the headlights. The beams lit up the edge of the clearing, and for a second, I saw something that made my stomach twist. Another pile of stones, taller this time, right in front of my tent. I don't know how long I sat there staring at it. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe more. Finally, I reached down, turned the key, and started the engine. The sound of the motor broke the silence, and I felt a tiny bit of relief until I noticed movement at the edge of the light. A shadow, low to the ground, slipping behind a tree. It wasn't an animal. It was too tall, too smooth. I slammed the truck into reverse and backed out so fast I nearly hit a stump. I didn't stop until I reached the narrow dirt road I'd driven in on. I followed that road for miles before I finally stopped to catch my breath. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the wheel. I sat there for a long time, staring at the forest in the rearview mirror. It looked calm and empty just like before. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe it had been another camper playing a prank. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. There hadn't been anyone out there. No cars, no fires, no sounds, nothing but me. I slept in the truck that night, parked near the main road. The next morning, I drove straight home. I didn't unpack for days. The thought of being near those woods again made my skin crawl. A week later, I finally washed the truck and went through my gear. That's when I noticed something that made my chest tighten. One of my maps, the one I'd marked with the location of my camp, was missing from the glove compartment. I know for sure I had it when I left. It was folded inside the logbook I used to keep track of my trips. I searched the truck from front to back, but it was gone. Every other map was still there except that one. I thought maybe I dropped it when I was packing up in the dark, but then I remembered how everything had been disturbed. The cooler, the gear, the piles of stones. Someone had been out there with me. Someone who knew I was alone, who watched me long enough to come close without me noticing. Maybe they'd been camping out there long before I arrived. Maybe they never left. I still think about Iron Hollow sometimes. I've been camping since then, but never that deep, never that far from people. There's something about that silence, the kind that makes your own breathing sound too loud, that still gets under my skin. And sometimes, when I'm driving late at night and the road cuts through a dark stretch of woods, I swear I catch glimpses of those same stacked stones in the beams of my headlights, standing perfectly straight, waiting. It was early November when I decided to take one last camping trip before winter really settled in. I had some time off work and wanted a quiet weekend away from everything. No phone, no noise, no people. I drove out to a place called Bracken Hollow, a thick stretch of woods about 4 hours from where I lived. I'd read about it online, just a small mention on an old hiking forum. It wasn't an official campground, just a patch of forest near an old fire road that hardly anyone used anymore. That sounded perfect to me. I wanted isolation. The drive out there was long and empty. The farther I went, the fewer signs of civilization there were. After a while, the asphalt turned into gravel, then into a narrow dirt path with deep ruts filled with brown rainwater. Fallen leaves covered most of the road. The trees leaned in close from both sides, their bare branches tangled together like black veins. The only sound was the steady crunch of my tires over the dirt and the faint hum of the engine. When I finally stopped, I was miles from any house, any sign of life at all. I parked near a small clearing that looked flat enough for a tent. The air was cold and still. The ground was littered with dead leaves that crunched under my boots as I unpacked. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and built a small ring of stones for the fire. The sun was already low by the time I finished, bleeding orange light through the trees. Everything looked golden and calm. Felt peaceful, too peaceful, maybe. When darkness came, it came fast. The firelight only reached so far, and beyond that, it was just endless black. The woods were silent. Not the kind of silence you get used to in a city. This was the kind that pressed on your ears. I sat by the fire for a while, eating from a can and listening to the occasional pop of sap in the flames. I thought about how far I was from anyone else. If something happened, no one would hear it. That thought didn't scare me at first, it just made me feel small. But as the hours went on, that feeling started to twist into something uneasy. Around 10 p.m., I decided to turn in. I put out most of the fire, leaving a few embers for warmth, and crawled into my tent. I zipped up the flap, wrapped myself in the sleeping bag, and stared at the dark fabric above me. It was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Eventually, I started to drift off. Sometime in the night, I woke up suddenly. It wasn't a dream. Something had pulled me out of sleep. I lay there completely still, breathing slow, trying to figure out what it was. At first, I thought I heard a faint scraping sound. Then I realized it was footsteps. Slow, uneven, crunching through the leaves just outside my tent. My body went rigid. The steps were heavy enough to be human, but there was no talking, no flashlight beam, nothing. Just the sound of someone moving around my campsite. I didn't move a muscle. I stared toward the faint glow of the tent wall, the dim orange reflection of the dying fire outside. The footsteps came closer, then stopped right beside the tent. I could hear the sound of breathing, slow, steady, too close. My pulse was pounding so hard I thought whoever was out there could probably hear it. I waited. After what felt like forever, the sound faded. Leaves shifted. The steps moved away. Eventually, everything went silent again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just lay there in the dark, knife in hand, waiting for the sun. When the light finally came, I stepped out of the tent carefully, scanning the trees. Everything looked normal, but I noticed footprints right away. Large ones, boot prints, circling around the fire pit and leading off toward the woods. My firewood pile had been disturbed, and my cooler was slightly open, but nothing was taken. Whoever had been there hadn't stolen anything. They just looked. The unease stayed with me the entire morning. I kept glancing around while making coffee, half expecting to see someone watching me. The forest seemed different in daylight, still quiet, but not empty. It felt like something was just out of sight, hidden behind the dense trees. I thought about packing up and leaving, but a part of me didn't want to admit I was that scared. I told myself it was probably a hunter or a hiker passing through. Still, I couldn't shake the image of those footprints right beside my tent. Around noon, I decided to take a short hike to clear my head. I followed what looked like an old animal trail behind my campsite. It was narrow, winding between trees so close together that the branches scratched at my jacket. The ground sloped gently downward until I reached a small stream. Across it, I saw something odd, a shape in the trees that didn't look natural. I crossed the stream and got closer. It was a small wooden structure, maybe 6 feet tall, made from branches lashed together with rope and twine. Inside the frame, hanging from the center, was a rusted metal can that swung slightly in the breeze. It looked like some kind of marker or trap, but it didn't look abandoned. The wood was fresh, the ropes were clean. Someone had built it recently. The ground around it was disturbed, with boot prints in the mud. I crouched down and touched the rope. It was still tight. The whole thing gave me a strange feeling, like I just stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. I backed away, turned around, and headed straight back to camp. When I got there, I froze. My tent was collapsed. The poles were snapped, and the fabric was half buried in leaves, like someone had stomped on it. My backpack was still there, but it had been emptied. Clothes, food, gear, all scattered across the ground. Nothing was missing, but everything had been gone through. Whoever had been there the night before had come back while I was gone. The calm I'd been forcing myself to hold onto vanished. I stuffed what I could into my pack, threw dirt over the fire pit, and started heading back toward my truck. The entire way, I kept hearing faint noises behind me. Not footsteps exactly, but the sound of movement, the kind of sound you catch only when you stop walking. Each time I turned around, there was nothing, just endless trees. By the time I reached the dirt road, the sun was already dipping low again. I could see my truck through the branches. I felt a rush of relief, but it didn't last. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. The driver's door was open. I knew for a fact I'd locked it before hiking in. My stomach dropped. I ran the last stretch, my boots slipping in the dirt. When I reached the truck, I saw that the glove compartment had been emptied. My map, my flashlight, and a few other things were gone. The keys, which I always kept in my pocket, were thankfully still there. I didn't even look around. I just got in, slammed the door, and started the engine. The road out was rough, and the truck jolted over every bump. But I didn't care. I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone step out onto the road behind me. The forest seemed darker than before, like it was closing in around me. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I drove straight home that night, didn't even unpack. When I finally got inside, I sat down and tried to process everything. The footprints, the noises, the wrecked camp, the open truck. None of it added up to anything that made sense. I kept telling myself it was probably just some local messing with me, or maybe someone living out there who didn't want strangers around. But that didn't explain why they'd gone through my stuff and not taken anything. 2 days later, I decided to check my phone's GPS tracker. I'd left it on during the trip, even though I didn't have service in the woods. I just wanted to see the path I'd taken. As I zoomed in on the route, I saw something that made my skin crawl. There was an extra marker on the map, a short path leading off from my campsite toward the direction I'd hiked to the stream. It showed movement that wasn't mine. The line started near my camp, looped around, then stopped just outside the clearing before heading back the same way I had walked that day. Whoever was in those woods had been following me. I never reported it. I told myself it wouldn't matter because I didn't see anyone's face. But I haven't camped alone since then. Sometimes I think about that wooden structure with the can hanging in the center. I wonder if it was some kind of warning, or maybe a marker that someone else had made to claim that part of the forest. Whatever it wasn't meant for me to find. Every time I drive past a stretch of dark woods now, I get that same feeling I had out there, that heavy silence, that pressure in the air, like something is still watching from just beyond the tree line, waiting for someone stupid enough to come back. It was supposed to be a quick solo camping trip, nothing complicated or risky. I had driven out to a stretch of forest about 2 hours from my town, an area I'd been to before with friends. But this time I wanted to be alone. I wanted the quiet, the isolation, the kind of silence that made your thoughts louder. I had packed everything: tent, sleeping bag, food, flashlight, extra batteries, small hatchet, and a folding chair. I parked my car at a small dirt clearing, threw on my backpack, and started walking down one of the old trails that wound deep into the woods. It was late afternoon, maybe around 4 p.m., and the air had that cool, heavy stillness that comes before evening. The trail was narrow, surrounded by thick pines, and every step made that dry, crunching sound from last season's fallen needles. I had no signal out there, which was normal for that area, but it always gave me that weird, disconnected feeling, like I just stepped out of the world for a while. I walked for about an hour before finding a flat spot near a small creek. It looked perfect. The ground was soft, open enough for a tent, and far enough from the trail that I wouldn't see anyone. I set up camp slowly, taking my time, listening to the distant sounds. Birds, water trickling, the faint wind moving through the trees. Everything felt calm, normal, even peaceful. By the time I got the fire going, the sun was low and turning the tops of the trees gold. I ate a quick meal and just sat there for a while, watching the light fade. That was always my favorite part, the transition from day to night in the woods. But that calm, for some reason, started to feel different after the fire burned down a bit. It wasn't anything big, just small things. I started noticing that the woods had gone quiet all of a sudden. The usual background noise, bugs, birds, small rustles, just seemed to fade away completely. It happens sometimes in forests, but it still gets under your skin when it does. I sat there, staring into the fire, trying to ignore that feeling that I wasn't as alone as I thought. Then I started hearing what sounded like snapping twigs, maybe 30 or 40 feet away. It wasn't close enough to be alarming, but it was close enough that I noticed it. Could have been an animal. That's what I told myself. Deer, maybe. The sound stopped after a while, and I didn't hear it again, so I let it go. I threw a few more pieces of wood on the fire and sat back, watching the flames twist and jump in the dark. By around 10 p.m., I was ready to sleep. The night air had dropped cold, and the fire was just glowing coals. I crawled into my tent, zipped it up, and laid in my sleeping bag, facing the thin wall of fabric that separated me from the trees outside. I was warm, comfortable, almost drifting off when I heard it again, the sound of footsteps. But this time it wasn't a quick noise or random snapping branch. It was steady, cautious, like someone trying not to make noise but still failing slightly. It came from the same side of the camp where I'd heard the earlier sound. I froze, just listening. It went on for maybe a minute. The steps would stop, then start again, slow and deliberate. I held my breath, every part of me alert. Then I heard what sounded like breathing. Very faint, but definitely human. I stayed perfectly still, hoping maybe it was my imagination or some weird echo. Then I heard a small metallic sound, like something brushing against metal. My hatchet was outside next to the fire pit. That realization made my chest tighten. I waited, trying to listen for any hint of movement, but the sound stopped. The woods were silent again, except for my heartbeat. I stayed awake for a long time after that, just lying there, barely blinking, until finally exhaustion dragged me into a restless sleep. When I woke up, the tent was full of gray morning light. For a second I felt relief. Maybe it had been an animal, maybe I just imagined it. But when I unzipped the tent and looked around, something was off. My backpack, which I'd left leaned against a tree, was about 5 feet from where I'd placed it. Not thrown, not dumped, just moved slightly. My hatchet was still there, but it was lying flat now instead of leaning upright. I tried to convince myself maybe I'd kicked it or moved it without realizing, but deep down I knew I hadn't. I spent the morning trying to shake off that feeling. I cooked breakfast, packed up a few things, and thought about leaving early. But I told myself I was being paranoid. Still, I decided to keep my phone and flashlight with me at all times, just in case. I hiked around for a while, staying within a half-mile of camp. Around noon, while walking near the creek, I noticed fresh footprints in the mud. Not animal tracks, boot prints. Medium size, probably a man's. I followed them for a bit, but they veered off into the brush and disappeared. That's when I made the decision to pack up and leave before dark. I didn't want to stay another night, not with someone else wandering around out there. I went back to my camp and started putting everything away quickly, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. It was maybe 3 p.m. when I heard the sound of branches breaking again, coming from behind the tree line. This time it was faster, heavier, like someone moving with purpose. I froze for a second, then grabbed my backpack and hatchet. I didn't see anyone, but I could hear them. Quick, uneven steps crunching leaves, getting louder, then suddenly stopping. I shouted out, just a quick yell to let whoever it was know I was there, hoping they'd go away. No answer, just silence. I didn't wait around to see who it was. I grabbed what I could, shoved my tent into my bag half folded, and started walking fast down the trail toward where my car was parked. The woods felt different now, dense, closed in, every sound amplified. I could hear faint rustling somewhere behind me for the first mile or so, but every time I stopped, it stopped too. That feeling of being followed got stronger the closer I got to the trailhead. At one point, maybe halfway to the car, I heard something that made my stomach drop. It was a quick, sharp whistle. Just one. Came from off to my right, not too far away. I turned, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. I started walking faster, almost jogging now, the straps of my backpack digging into my shoulders. I didn't care about anything except getting out. When I finally saw the clearing where I'd parked, I felt a rush of relief. The car looked exactly how I'd left it. I threw my bag inside, jumped into the driver's seat, and locked the doors immediately. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. That's when I noticed something that still makes my chest tighten thinking about it. On the passenger side mirror, there was a faint, greasy handprint, like someone had touched it recently. It wasn't there when I arrived the day before. I sat there for a few seconds, engine running, staring at that print. Then I hit the gas and drove out of there, not slowing down until I reached the main road. I kept checking the rearview mirror the whole way back, half expecting to see someone walking down the trail or a car pulling out behind me. When I got home, I unpacked everything. That's when I noticed one more thing. Inside the side pocket of my backpack, the one I rarely use, there was a small torn piece of gray fabric, like from a jacket. I didn't own anything that color. I don't know who was out there or how long they'd been watching me. Maybe it was just some drifter, maybe a hunter, maybe someone who had been living out there and didn't want me near their spot. But I know what I heard, and I know what I saw. I've gone camping since then, but never alone again. That trip taught me that the woods don't have to be haunted to scare you. Sometimes it's just the thought of another human being quietly watching from behind the trees, waiting for you to make the wrong move.